The Bible says that the walls of Jericho fell after the Israelites marched around city walls for 7 days. This is known as the Battle of Jericho, and it was the first battle fought by the Israelites as they worked toward the conquest of Canaan. Now, Canaan is the land that God told Abraham his descendants would inherit, aka the Promised Land. If you're Christian or Jewish, you're probably familiar with this story, but I'm not sure that many people realize that Jericho and Canaan, they were in Palestine. The first written records referring to Palestine came about around the 12th century BCE in Egypt. Back then, the term Peliset was used to describe neighboring people or land. In the 8th century BCE, the Assyrians referred to the region as Palestu, and eventually these names were carried over to the Greeks, appearing in the history of Herodotus as Palestine. In 1516, Ottoman Turks invaded and occupied Palestine. This occupation lasted for 402 years, except for the 9 years between 1831 and 1840, when the Egyptian governor Muhammad Ali sent in troops to capture it. This was short-lived because the Ottomans regained control and ruled Palestine until 1918, when the Ottoman Empire fell after World War I. As you can imagine, after 400 years of occupation by the Ottomans, Arab Palestinians were ready to get them out their land so they could have their own identity, and World War I created an opportunity for this to happen. In 1916, Britain entered an agreement with Arab leader Hussein bin Ali that said that Britain would help fight the Ottomans if they could secure economic and other privileges in the region. In exchange, Britain said that they would recognize and support an independent Arab state. A year later, Britain's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote what's known as the Balfour Declaration. This declaration basically said that Britain would establish a national home for Jewish people in Palestine and that they would do whatever it takes to make that happen. They went on to say that nothing shall be done to prejudice the existing rights of non-Jewish communities. So what they were basically saying is, hey Jewish people, we're going to give you some land in Palestine, but leave the people that's already living there alone. Now you might be wondering, who gave Britain the authority to divide up the land? Well, remember, this was during the middle of World War I, and little did the rest of the world know, Britain and France had entered into an agreement in 1916 where they had already drew up a map of how they would divide the land that they would acquire if they won the war. Basically, dirty double dealing.
Arabia's for the Arabs now. That's what I've told them anyway. That's what they think. That's why they're fighting.
Oh, surely.
Essentially, Britain had the Arabs do the dirty work of fighting the Ottomans. And once they controlled the region, instead of keeping the promise of supporting their independence, they gave away part of the land to the Jews. As you can imagine, this didn't go over well with the Arab Palestinians. Now, it's important to point out that there was already a Jewish population that was native to Palestine. However, in 1914, they only made up just under 14% of the total population. It's no secret that Jews have been some of the most persecuted people in the world, dating back centuries. Besides that, they have historically been known as a people with no land. So in 1896, a Jewish journalist named Theodor Herzl published a paper that eventually led to the start of Zionism. His idea was basically that the world was so anti-Jew that they would never be able to fully assimilate, so the only solution was the establishment of a Jewish state. Now don't forget that the land that God promised to Abraham's descendants is in Palestine. So what better place to migrate to? World War I ended in 1918, and the League of Nations began to start dividing up territories that once belonged to the Ottoman and German empires. And just as engineered in backdoor dealings, Britain was given a mandate over Palestine. Now that Britain had acquired Palestine, they didn't bother to consult with the native Palestinians about how they wanted to move forward with their future, and instead asked Zionists what their vision for Palestine was. After decades of continuous Jewish migration and realizing that Britain wasn't going to help them achieve independence, the Palestinians revolted in 1936. In an effort to stop the revolt, British forces arrested, tortured, and executed Palestinians. They also exiled Palestinian leaders and blew up the homes of Palestinian civilians. This resulted in Palestinian fighters attacking British and Jewish targets. Then, British and Jewish forces retaliated, conducting raids on Palestinian villages. Over time, Britain figured that they needed to do something about all the chaos that ensued, so they created the Peel Commission to investigate how they could solve the problem. Their solution was to further divide the land, giving part of the land to Jews and another part to Palestinians. Now the problem with this was that Palestinians were still the majority, so around 250,000 of them had to be forcibly removed to make room for a Jewish state. As you can imagine, this made matters even worse. By 1939, Britain was running out of options, so they came up with what's known as the White Papers. The white paper said that Palestine would gain independence in 10 years and that it would no longer be partitioned and that everyone living there had to share the land together. It also imposed limits on Jewish land purchases and greatly restricted Jewish immigration. Zionists felt betrayed by this, and some retaliated by setting off bombs around the country, killing dozens of Palestinians. 1939 also saw the start of World War II, where the world witnessed the genocide of over 6 million Jews. In an attempt to find asylum, Jews began migrating to Palestine. This set off an even bigger conflict between the Zionists and Britain. Exhausted from fighting in both World War II and against the Zionists, Britain gave up on their interest in Palestine and asked the United Nations to take over in 1947. The UN's plan was to partition the country, designating half of it for a Jewish state. Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world rejected the idea, but the Zionists agreed. Knowing that they had the stronger force than the Palestinians, the Zionist militia was instructed to drive out as many Palestinians as possible to seize more land that they had been assigned by the UN. On April 9, 1948, more than 110 Palestinian men, women, and children were slaughtered by Zionist forces. The massacre took place in a village called Deir Yassin during what's known as the Nakba, which means the catastrophe in Arabic.
91-year-old Dawood Assad was there the day of the massacre and was 18 at the time.
Friday morning, they attacked us. They found my uncle, and they put him on the wall, and they shot him 8 bullets in cold blood. My grandmother, she went in the village to see my mother. On her way, she got shot.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים.
The time between 1947 and 48 was known as the Palestine War, where it's estimated that 6,000 Jews and 10,000 Palestinians were killed, with 750,000 Palestinians forcibly removed from their homes and pushed into refugee camps. 1948 was also the year that David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel, with the Palestine National Council proclaiming Palestine as a state in 1988. In 1987, the Islamist militant movement Hamas was founded the day after an Israeli army truck crashed into a car and killed 4 Palestinian day workers. In the time since, Hamas has perpetrated countless violent attacks against Israelis and worked in opposition of any progress toward peace that Palestine attempted with Israel. The early 90s brought about the Oslo Accords. This was essentially a peace plan that was negotiated between Israel and Palestine that was intended to finally put an end to all the fighting. Unfortunately, the terms of the plan were opposed by citizens on both sides, and the goals of the Accords never came to fruition. In November 1995, an Israeli extremist assassinated Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin at a peace rally. Basically, he killed his own country's leader because he was simply trying to make peace with Palestine. Now in this video, I intentionally left out some of the more recent events that happened between Israel and Palestine. And I did that because I'm not interested in the debates, and I'm not interested in trying to determine who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not from Palestine, and I'm not from Israel. I'm not Muslim, and I'm not Jewish. But what I am is a human being. And as a human being, I got tired of stories being given with no context and arguments and debates being had that didn't have any basis in fact or history. Do what you want with the information that I provided. You can agree with it or not. You can believe it or not. You can get mad or not. But at the end of the day, if you have a problem with anything that I said, your issue is with history, not with me.